You are listening to the Sisters Through Faith podcast, and I have my friend Megan on here today. Okay, I'm gonna read a little bio about Megan, and y'all are gonna get to see how cool she is and why I think she's so cool. So, Megan Taylor is a former nurse practitioner turned functional health practitioner, and she empowers Christian women to break free from survival mode and reclaim an embodied faith through trauma informed story work and a holistic approach to healthcare. Through her work, she helps women steward their mind, body, and spirits by empowering, inspiring, and equipping them with knowledge of their God designed physiology through a biblical lens. She owns her own online private practice and runs an online membership where she creates programs and content infused with knowledge. She has gleaned from years of experience working with women one on one. She also creates content that is shaped by her own story and experiences by reversing chronic symptoms caused by a journey through breast cancer treatment, complex grief and trauma, chronic fatigue, and anxiety and depression. She currently lives in, say that name,
Albania.
Albania. Okay. With her husband, like, listen, I've been practicing. I should have listened to it. They have the goal of spreading the good news of Jesus' kingdom online and hope to one day plant churches in underreached areas of the world. They both create Bible study resources intended to help people know God better. So they have two different websites. There is tobelikechrist.com, and I'm going to add all of these on our in the comments and in our groups and stuff so everybody can click on them and the refinedwellness.org. So I know how cool Megan Taylor is, and I'm so thankful that I came across you. I have done, several of your ladies' Bible studies, and it's great. Y'all do good. Y'all do really good content and interesting, and the way y'all design it and stuff. And I also share Luke's stuff too. Like I love those little short videos and stuff because it's not overwhelming. It's something you can put, like in your everyday, and I really like it. Y'all are what I call go-getters. That's what y'all are.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for your encouragement. That's so sweet.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Really think
so I told Megan when she got on here, I wanted her to talk about some funny experiences that you have had moving from the US because we're over here in the US and I don't think we realize that everything is so different everywhere else. So tell us something funny.
Okay, so I have two. One was when we moved to Tunisia last year. We didn't realize that there's a lot of wild animals. So they have camels just like around. They tie their hooves together and
Yeah.
they're just like, chilling and eating. And you're like, what are you doing? And then there's horses that will just, they're owned by someone, but they'll just linger around and go up and down the street all by themselves. And then there's tons of wild cats. And
Oh,
so, yeah, they're
I'm
very sweet.
allergic to cats,
You
so.
are. Well, one day we were at this new restaurant that we wanted to try, and there was like three cats by our feet. And I was like, oh my goodness, they're probably hungry. I should feed them. And I had like this internal battle of, well, if I feed them, like, is there gonna be more of them? Oh, it's fine. So I fed them, and three cats turned into six cats, and then six.
And you're trying to eat.
Yeah, and Luke and I are looking at each other like, do we leave? Like, what do we do? And all the locals are like staring at us, and we're like, where are we? What do we do? So then that turned into like 12 cats. Like, I'm not kidding.
I would be having an allergy attack by this point.
Yeah, it was wild. And they started climbing on the chairs and then on the table. And we're like, okay, we're done. So we got up and they just pounced on the table and we're like, can we pay? We just want to get out of here. Like, no
It
one's
seems
helping.
like they would try to do something to like prevent.
Yeah, it was fun. And then the second one, it's not really a funny story, but it's kind of like a awe-inspiring story that had happened. About 2 years ago, we were meeting up for coffee with our friends, and they're a young couple that lives here in Vlora, Albania, and they're running late. And they showed up and they had a little girl, a little baby. She's a little infant. And she was just the most perfect little baby. And my friend is holding her and we're like, what's going on? Like, what's happening? And they said, well, the mom stopped by our house last night and said, I can't take care of her anymore. Can you take her? And they were like, of course. And so they took her in and they have started the first foster type
Oh,
program here in Vlora, which is a tiny town in Albania. And I just saw her. It's been 2 years, so I saw her, and she's the
oh,
sweetest thing, and she's speaking English. They're teaching her Portuguese because the mom is Brazilian, and then she's learning Albanian. And I was just like, Lord, like that is just such a story of like
oh. Yeah,
your goodness and your care for people, and it's just so
yeah.
beautiful. So, yeah.
Oh, I like that. That's sweet. Okay, I'm going to talk just for a second about some things about being a servant for God, what that means. So that's the title is Teach Me to Be a Servant. And I picked Megan for this one because it's like, man, y'all are just so inspiring. I mean, it really is. It's so encouraging that I mean, y'all are younger and that y'all have went out on a limb to do this. And so I'm gonna read these few little things. So being a servant of God means that you are obedient, recognizing that God is in control and you need to do something about it. Another one is being humble, sacrificial, and motivated. So when I think about a servant for God, it is you are definitely going out of your own way, of what maybe you think that your life should be like, or just here, worldly, we think we have to do certain things, or we have to accomplish certain things. And being a servant for God means that no matter where I am, no matter, how my life turns out, that I'm still going to be a servant for God. And maybe pursuing people and teaching the word and stuff like that, no matter where you are. And we can't get discouraged that for the worldly things, we have to be focusing on the internal things in God. So I want to ask y'all, tell me what made y'all want to do this in the first place, to pick up and go out of the US and try all of this.
About like 9 years ago, when I was restored to the church, I'm not going to share my whole story because it's pretty long.
Oh, and by the way, everybody go buy the book Parched. Okay, I'm
Uh,
gonna put that. I'm gonna put that in there too. Listen, I have given that to so many people. I mean, it just like it'll convict you. I mean, it will get to you. It's so real, and I mean that's what makes it so good is that it's real.
Well, thank you for that encouraging words. You're so encouraging. And that's
Yeah,
part of also being a servant is having people that are encouraging and pouring into you. So I'm so thankful for women like you.
yeah.
And so around 9 years ago, when I was restored, I was on fire. And I was just like, I came from coping with drugs and alcohol to just being on fire for Jesus. And I was like, I just need to tell everyone about this because it has just wrecked my life in the most
And
beautiful.
honestly, I have noticed that people who, come from that type of situation and then they come back to God, it is a whole lot, like you're saying, it's a whole lot stronger than maybe someone who, has not fell away in an extreme way. Maybe it's more subtle. I feel like people fall away from the church when they've grown up in it. But when something like that, and then you come back, people are way more on fire for it.
It was a rude awakening, but a good awakening.
Yeah, yeah,
And, and so when I came back, I started inviting just a ton of people to church. And I remember one man came up to me after services one day and he's like, what are you saying to these people? Because I had like 9 visitors with me once.
yeah.
What are you saying to get them here? And I was like, I'm really
Because I need to know.
I'm really not like saying a lot. I'm just sharing what has happened and inviting them to come hear the word. And so I just wanted to know my church family, and I started coming to like random things like Care Bears on Sundays to get to know the older women and
Yeah.
just really wanting to fully invest. And
Using like those, like where congregations try to put those connections between people and taking advantage of it and not saying, oh, I'm busy, I can't go. Like you're actually trying to know people better.
yeah, yeah. And then I went on my first mission trip. I went to Costa Rica, and then it was really when I went to India where I fell in love with mission work. And I went there to teach basic hygiene, first aid, and like natural childbirth. but then I tied in devotions into it. And it was such an incredible experience to see people helped physically, but also the spiritual component where they were just like really hungry for that as
Yeah.
well. And it was on my heart during that time. I was a registered nurse, but I felt like I needed more information and I wanted to
Yeah.
become a nurse practitioner. And so I was sitting in this kitchen in India and I'm like, I need to go back to NP school. I'm going to do it. How am I going to do this? So then after that, I went home and I told my grandpa I was in the military at the time and I had gotten a job offer to become a flight nurse in the military, which is a really big opportunity. But I said, I'm getting out of the military. I'm going to go to MP school. I don't know how I'm
Yeah.
going to do it. I don't know if I can do it. And he fully supported me. He was like, let's do this. And he's really the man that, because of him, I am who I am today. He's such a
Yeah.
godly, he's an elder in the church and just, so that was part of my coming to want to do mission work. And I had volunteered at a church camp one year and I heard Luke preach. And I looked at my aunt and I was like, is it possible to be in love with someone's soul? Because he was preaching on evangelism. He was just like on fire. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this
You're
is
like, ooh, I like him.
yeah, and we grew up in the same congregation, but I just did not know who he was because I was so distracted by the world and just like very toxic relationships. So I was like hit, I was like, who is this? And
Oh,
it turned out that the Lord had really been working on Luke's heart as well. And so in his story, he was very into going back to preaching school because he wanted to be a missionary. He was finishing up his business degree. And so when we met, it was kind of like this intersection of both of us wanting to do mission work. And so that's kind of how that came to be.
yeah.
And so
Oh,
we made plans, but they fell through and
yeah. And that's what I mean. Your life is probably not going to go, anybody's life is not going to go the way that we think it should be or expect, but a lot of good can come out of when your plans get wrecked, you know? Because sometimes I feel like when we make these plans, we are so focused on self, like we forget to add God in the mix anyway. And then it gets whoop, and then you're like, well, that probably turned out better than I could have done in the first place. So okay, so tell me how this question just like amazes me with y'all. Tell me how y'all get through the hard times without family and having to like make new friends and new acquaintances and because I feel like if I picked up and left and went completely across the country, I'd probably be good for about 2 weeks, but then I'll be like, I want my permanent house back and I want my family that lives 10 minutes from me and that's hard. So tell me sort of about how y'all get through that.
Well, I know that when I struggle with missing home, there's a lot of grief that is intertwined with that. And after losing your mom, you know this,
Yeah.
there's like a feeling of being an orphan in the world, and I want to call her when any inconvenience happens. Like our bathroom flooded the other day, and I'm like, oh, I just want to be mothered right now. I want to call my mom.
Yeah.
Knowing that about myself, if I'm not really careful to tend to those hurts, then I will spin in anxiety and depression. I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we
Yeah.
here? So the way I combat that is one, by honoring my mind, body, and spirit. I know what it feels like when grief is rising in me. And so I tend to that. I stay really rooted in the word. And then I confess, whether that be to a mentor, and I'm like, I need to be held in this story right now. And the
Yeah.
story that for me is I feel like an orphan, and that
Yeah.
gives them space to kind of encourage me. And then with Luke, I confess to him, and every time I confess, I swear he's always like, I've been feeling the same way, and it just like brings us together.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how we stay rooted and encouraged. It can get really hard, but
Yeah.
knowing that we're on the same team and then being able to reach out is really helpful.
I think another thing, like such virtual stuff like this right here, you're able to talk to people because I feel like it would be a completely different ballpark if there was like not the internet or like being able to video call or even talk to other, but like we have means of communication. Um, our preacher lost his mom. I think it would have been last year, and he said the world is just a different place after you lose your mama. And I joke with my dad all the time because my dad raised me and my sister by himself until my stepmom came along in my teenage years. So, I mean, my mom died at 3 when I was 3. And so there was a really long time where daddy just did it himself. And I call him my two-in-one parent. Like, you better be taking your vitamins and you better be going to the doctor because I ain't ready for that yet, okay? And he'll laugh, but I'm like, I'm serious, you know? And that's hard when you lose, you know, like you talked about your granddad, your staples in your life, and or even just moving away from them. You're used to them, and then all of a sudden you're not. I'm like, whoa, that's
Mm.
tough. So I admire y'all for being able to, I mean, even be able to do that because, you know, and I also think about when the Bible talks about Jesus, he had nowhere to lay his head. He'd never had like a permanent, this is my house, this is my stuff. You know, he was constantly on the go for other people. It wasn't, you know, he wasn't focused on the worldly stuff. He was focused on that. And side note, I've been like getting rid of everything. I'm like, we don't need this. This is
That's
worldly.
so
Get away.
good.
Yeah, I'm like, I have too many clothes. Get rid of it. I don't need this. Get rid of it. And people laugh at me all the time because I'm like selling it, giving it to a thrift store or something. But things get to me. Like too much stuff gets to me. And I feel like I'm a better person when I get rid of things. So maybe it'd be good for me to just pick up and go somewhere else. And then I wouldn't have nothing at all. I
Whatever.
yeah, I'm like, be over it. Okay, let's see. What is something you think a Christian should be more willing to do when you think about being a servant and putting God first?
Um, so let's see.
Because it is hard to put the God's priorities first instead of ours. And I'll say this, I even think when I think about that, I think about not being present for stuff that the church tries to do, you know, like whether it's some type of youth thing or something you do for the older people in your congregation, just those extra little events and activities that they do. I think about that when people are constantly putting sports ahead of everything. You know, like we're missing services because of a sport for my kid, or, you know, whatever, or taking a girls' trip and I'm just not going to go to church. You know, those little bitty things you do not think about, but you are putting your wants first and you're neglecting stuff. So that's what I mean, that's what I think about when I think about what should a Christian be more willing to do. And I think it's putting God's stuff first instead of my stuff.
I have about 5 things. How many do you want?
All of them. Go for it.
Well, the first one I would say that I learned that was kind of just like thrust on me was when I had this desire to serve, and then I ended up with breast cancer, and the Lord's like, no, like you're not
Yeah.
going.
Pause. Yeah.
And I had to drop out of school, and I was getting married in 4 days, and I'm like, what now? And I remember during that time that I was really struggling because one of my trauma responses when my mom had passed away was hyper independence. And this nurse was taking me around the place where I was going to get chemo. And she looked at me and she said, Megan, what you're going to need to do is when someone says, hey, I would like to do this for you, or can I help you? You know what your answer is? And I was like, no,
Yes.
what? She said, yes, please, and thank you. I was like, no, I can't do that. And what I realized in that experience was that part of serving is also being willing to receive. And I don't mean like consumerism, which is very common in the church where you're like, give me, what can you do for me? This
Yeah,
is,
but your presence.
yeah, it's more of this vulnerability that says, wow, like this is really hard. My hair is falling out. I feel so
Mhm.
bloated. I'm in so much pain. And I want to serve for my husband. And when my mother-in-law asked to come over and clean the house, I'm like, I don't want to say yes because maybe she'll think that I'm a bad wife. And I said yes. And she would come over and she would vacuum and she would do laundry and then she would just sit with me. And it was just such an incredible way to receive. And
Yeah.
then my my cousin came to be with me with my first chemo. My aunt came with me and she like covered me in essential oils after my
Oh,
surgery, and that was another way to receive. And then a coworker showed up on my first chemo. She made sure I had a package, and I was just like, wow, wow, this is incredible. And what I was taught through that experience is that when you say yes, you are giving a gift to the other person because people love to serve. And when you say no, they very often feel rejected. It's like a
yeah.
little kid giving you something and they're like, here, and you're like, oh, I don't want that. And they're like, okay.
It is. I mean, it really is. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first one would be willing to receive and don't be afraid to ask for help. Because when you are afraid or you're isolating and you're like, I don't want to be a burden, because that's how I felt. I was like, I don't want to
Yeah.
be a Satan can really work in that fertile ground and he'll create fruit like resentment and loneliness and isolation and not feeling good enough. But when you choose to receive, I feel like that is very helpful and what a lot of
Yeah.
Christians struggle with, especially women.
Yeah. Because we want to feel like we have it all together. And sometimes we need help. So
Yeah.
just say yes. And thank you.
I was like, oh, okay. She, I just love that nurse because she was talking about how if you go to the grocery store bald and someone's like, here, you can cut in front of me because they like feel a sense of,
Yeah.
wow, you're struggling. She says, you say, yes, please, and thank you. And then you enjoy
Yeah.
that.
I gotta remember that.
It was so hard for me, but I learned so much and yeah. All right, so the next thing, I know I'm actually really nervous to say this because I know that a lot of people can get offended when topics like this come up. And I want anyone listening to know that this is coming from a posture of love and
Mhm.
also posture of working with women ages 70 to like 13. And it's very
Yeah.
common. And it's to be willing to tend to the areas of your own story and your own pain where there's been damage that has occurred. That then, once you work through that, you're able to be fully present with someone.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people today struggle with being fully present. And
Mhm.
one of the best gifts I believe that women can give each other is a sense of connection and safety. But
Mhm.
it's so hard right now because people feel very isolated and they want to be seen and heard. And so
Yeah.
we're
Oh, yeah.
missing each other. And
Mm.
so being willing to kind of look at your own story and maybe just even asking, okay, when someone tells me something hard, how do I respond? Do I want
And
to
that's hard because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And that's probably why we don't talk deep enough about stuff with each other, is because we are afraid to say the wrong thing. So then we just don't acknowledge people's pain or sadness or grief because we don't know how to respond to it. And sometimes, like you said, like you're just being there, your presence, let people help you. Let people, like if they're trying to get in, if they're trying to, be closer to you and understand what's going through, you've got to be willing to let them.
Yeah, especially with young people, I find, well, and older people. I have a woman who lost her husband and she's been really struggling getting back into community because she feels almost spiritually bypassed sometimes because instead of people sitting with her in her pain, they'll be very quick to want to fix it and be like, I'll pray for you. Here's a verse that will be comforting for you. And that is great. Like I eat, live, and breathe the word of God. But there's something so medicinal about saying, wow, like tell me what that's been like for you.
Yeah, and
I'm
just
like,
let people talk. Sometimes they, like you said, like they want to be heard. They want to tell their side of stuff.
yeah, yeah. So that's another thing that I would recommend. And then the, let's see, I did want to touch on the fact that when I say digging into your pain, I don't mean go to therapy. I'm not against therapy. I think therapy can be an incredibly healing modality, but I think that in the upcoming years, there's going to start being a big push in the church for go to therapy. If you don't go to therapy, you are not going to be able to have safe, connected relationships. And that's not true. And what very often is true is people will go to therapy and then they'll start diagnosing everyone around them. And they'll be
Mm.
like, they don't respect my boundaries, so they're a narcissist, or they're doing this, so I
And
can't
sometimes
be.
people are just going through a hard period and they don't need to be diagnosed. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm not against therapy at all. I think it can be so incredibly empowering, and I have a lot of therapist friends. But when we're jumping to that rather than establishing a sense of connection in our community and being fully present with people, that is medicinal. That is powerful. And when we're then saying, well, my therapist said this, this, and this, but then there's an elder or a woman who's older than you and she's just like dripping with wisdom. And you're like, no, because my
Mhm.
therapist said this, I just feel like there's a lot of danger in that. And I think that we need to be really discerning of that
And
coming up.
God created the church for a purpose. I mean, he wants you to have that connection with your church family for a reason. Oh, I mean, I've got some of my best friends are old enough to be my mother, and they probably laugh at me because I'm young and have no wisdom, but I just love them.
Oh,
I mean, they just like pour into me, and I can, like call them on a drop of a hat, and they're there for me. And they don't have to be my age; they can be older, and I've learned more from them than I do anybody.
right. Yeah. So that would be one, and then I have two left. How much
Okay.
time you got?
No, it's
Or
fine.
Um, the next one would be honoring your mind, body, spirit connection when you're serving. Because what tends to happen is we start to serve from a posture of wanting to go, 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 do, and we will ignore what our body is telling us. And from a physiology standpoint, we start running on stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And in men, especially men who are called and having to carry a lot of like church things that are going on, or even just men who work outside of the home and they're carrying a lot. When they're not taking seasons of resting and honoring their physical body, they'll run on stress hormones like cortisol, and then they'll start to look for a release. And sometimes it's through coping mechanisms like food, sometimes it's sex and porn, sometimes it's filling up with rage because they don't have that
Yeah.
release. And so I think I hope that we start having conversations surrounding how do we honor our bodies in serving? How do we not burn out and run on stress hormones? How can we spend more time in parasympathetic mode, which is resting and digesting and being in community, but also accomplishing things? It's just
Yeah.
this balance. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Anything to say after that one?
No, because I think that was great. That was it. You ain't got to say nothing else.
Well, thank
Yeah, I
you.
mean, and I know, like, I personally, like, I got a lot going on right now, and I have to really talk to myself about, okay, do I need a rest day? Like, today is my rest day. Like, I've got to, I mean, I'm in overly full course load in college, and I work a full-time job, and I'm doing this, and I got kids, and I love it, but I have to rest. Like I can tell when, like when you're talking about burnout, I can tell when I'm getting close to it. And if you don't acknowledge when your body needs to rest, that's when bad stuff comes. So yes, I
Yeah.
completely.
Even if you look at like Jesus, he was busy. He was busy a lot, but he also stole away to be with the Father in quiet and
Yeah.
prayer. If you look at Mary and Martha, Martha is a very great servant, and Mary is sitting at Jesus's feet, and Jesus is like, Martha, Martha. He had to call her twice because she's so busy going,
Yeah.
and which is good, but from physiology standpoint, her heart posture was starting to cause her to spin into resentment. And she's like,
Yeah.
why is no one helping me? What is going on?
But that
And that's
wasn't the important
happened.
thing at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last one on that topic is being willing to use your frustration as motivation and go first. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to look at a congregation and be like, they need to be doing this. Why are they not doing this? I'm so frustrated with this.
Mhm.
And that can almost make you want to leave and go find another
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
right? And so I'll give you a personal example. When I came back to the church, I really wanted community, and I was like, why do we only meet on Sundays and Wednesdays and say hi, how are you? And then we leave. I'm like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is going on? And
Yeah.
that wasn't true with the members. I was just kind of like an outsider coming in. And so I could have said, well, this is silly. I'm going to go find another community that feels more like a connection and a sense of safety. But what I did was I used that frustration and I said, okay, what can I do? And I started going to different women, totally out of my comfort zone. And I was like, do you want to have coffee with me? I just want to chat. Like, let's
No,
just go.
yeah. And you'll be amazed at people that say yes. Like, hey, would your family like to come eat with us? Or, I mean, anything like that. You'd be amazed that people say yes. You have that fear of them being like, no, but they do say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I started doing that, I started realizing that a lot of the women had such similarity in their stories, but they weren't really talking to each other because just life, like kids,
Yeah.
busy. And so I wanted to establish a support group. And I went to my elders and I was like, hey, can I do this thing? I have a plan. And they're like, well, do you have a therapy degree? And I was like, well, no. And they were like, okay, well, we don't want to get in trouble because what if people come with like addictions and stuff? And I was like, well, I just want a support group where we can start talking about things and have devotions and prayer. And they were very hesitant, but then they said, okay, if you can find an older woman in the church who will lead this with you, then yeah. And
Yeah.
so I found an older woman, I came up with a plan, and we did it, and it turned out really beautiful.
Yeah.
When you're not willing to go first, you're waiting on someone else to do what could be that frustration, could be something that God has put on your heart that you have a gift to do, but instead of doing it, you're like, I'm not the one, or I can't do that. Someone
And that's
else
a
should do
lot.
it.
I mean, that's a Satan lie right there. It's trying to discourage you from doing something that is good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay,
And
I got. Go ahead.
that's all I have.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to read a few verses that I had saved that talks about in the Bible about being a servant. So Luke 6:38 says, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. And I'm going to read Matthew 25:35 through 40. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry or feed you or thirsty or give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go visit you? And the king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So, like when I read that, I think about you don't be choosy who you help. It's your job as a Christian and a servant of God to be that helper. I used to, when I was younger, I would think it was so silly to do like taking meals to people, like when, like I guess when I was, I'm talking about young, I'm talking about like high school and down, I would think, well, what are they getting out of that? What people, and a lot of times it's older people or people that are just in situations that they don't have money or stuff like that. And I would think, well, why are you doing that? Like they may not even come to church or they may not. And then as I've gotten older, I see the impact that it makes on people, and you don't be a servant to get rewarded. You be a servant because that's what God commanded you to do. It's not, I'm only going to do this if someone gives something back to me or I get recognized. It has nothing to do with that. You don't let the right hand know what your left hand is doing. And I'm glad that like I've gotten to see that as I've gotten older, that you be a servant because that's what you're supposed to do. And even if you keep trying to do something or do some type of act of kindness for somebody, or it is never to be rewarded. And if you go in with it with that kind of mindset, you're going to get disappointed really quick because do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
like, I mean, people are not always going to maybe receive, even if you try to do something nice and invite them to church, they may flat out ignore you. So, but that's still your job to be doing it. And that sort of goes into this verse that I had Galatians 5:14. It talks about you love your neighbor as yourself. And I've got really young little kids, but we've tried to teach this already is you treat other people the way that you want to be treated. And when you're young, That's a hard thing. I mean, it's hard right now as an adult, but your actions towards other people, the way you speak and talk about other people and stuff like that, you would want them to do the exact same about you. And a lot of the times you are leading by example, and that's just what we're commanded to do as Christians. I also wanted to bring up John 13 when Jesus washes the disciples' feet. There's this like quote, and I know you've seen it, it says, "You be too busy washing feet that you don't have time to throw stones."
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and it just got chill bumps like when I said that. But I think that that passage it shows Jesus' humility. He didn't have to be washing their feet. I mean, you can think about in that in a literal sense of physically washing somebody's feet, or as in, doing something for other people. You just do it because that's what you should be doing. I wanted to mention this. There's this lady that speaks at Ladies' Day. She's one of the ones that's over TLC, the ladies' conference that was just, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. And she, at one of her Ladies' Days, I was listening to her and she was talking about something that her mom taught her. And the end result is going into being a servant for people and not letting stuff come to you. But she talked about that her mom, when they were younger and they would come to her and they would be like frustrated about something happened at school, one of my friends, just anything like that, her mom would say, okay, you vent about it for just a few minutes, you pray about it, and then you go do something for somebody else. And I have really tried to like use that mindset myself. So if y'all ever see me like crazy cooking on Facebook, y'all just know that I'm trying to do something for somebody else. I'm with it right now. I'm not in a good mood. Something's happened or whatever. But I try to remind myself of that when things are just, rough or you're frustrated or because if you don't try to change that mindset, like you talked about earlier, you will dwell in it. You will, but really you just have to pick up and keep going. And I thought that was a really good tip that, you vent about it, you pray about it, and then you get up and you go do something for somebody else.
Yeah, definitely.
So, like I said, if y'all see me cooking a lot, something's going on. Let's see. Mark 10:45 says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So when we talk about being a servant, teach me to be a servant. Being a servant means you're putting someone else's needs ahead of yours. And it can also mean being involved in the lives of others and just looking for opportunities to serve. Just like you talked about, just conversations with people. People in general that you just see at work or at ball games or at the grocery store, or we talked about this past time about being intentional as an adult. Like when you talk to people, look them in the eye and have a conversation with them. That you're going to be different by doing like being intentional with people like that. So I was just going to mention some qualities of a servant include humility. A true servant starts with humility. Compassion. A servant is compassionate. Seeing needs, constantly looking for ways to help people. A servant's able to see these needs of others. Courage. A servant has courage to go do these things. A servant has a sense of responsibility. It's on my heart that I should be helping other people, that I should be doing this, and willingness to serve. I think that's a big one that we have to pray about. God, help me see those opportunities, help me see those doors that I can open and I can help other people. So, I thought that was a good little thing of humility, compassion, seeing the need, courage, and a sense of responsibility that it's my responsibility to be doing it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I also think remembering to work from a place of worth rather than trying to like earn God's love or the admiration of other people or trying to please other people. Because if you're serving with the intention of someone like praising you, you're going to be hurt because a
Yeah,
lot
like
of
I said, you're going to be disappointed if you're looking for the approval of other people. That's not the goal. Because
yeah,
people aren't always going to pat you on the back or tell you good job, and they shouldn't, because that shouldn't be your goal to begin with. But yeah, you will get disappointed very quickly.
yeah.
Okay, so at the end of every podcast, I ask a co-host, tell me a random tip that just helps your family in general.
So one thing Luke and I do in our marriage, because part of serving is recognizing that you're a team rather than against each other. And
Yeah.
sometimes in hard seasons when you're busy, it can be really tempting to feel like you're against each other. So what we do is every once in a while, we'll say from a posture of not defense, where you're not going to be constantly defensive when they
Yeah.
tell them. We say, what can I do to be a better wife? This is what I ask him. And then he asks, what can I do to be a better husband? And sometimes it's something like super silly, like, could you please remember to put down the toilet seat so I don't fall into
That's
it?
the thing. I don't know. It is a thing.
That was
Because I
early
don't turn
on
the
in
light
marriage.
on in the middle of the night. So if I fall in, I fall in.
Yeah, that was very early on in marriage. And sometimes it's more serious things, but giving that space to say, what can I do to be better, honors the other person and it allows them to speak from their heart and say, actually, could you start doing this or could you
Yeah.
not do this because it does this?
Yeah. I remember when it would have been like the first couple years that we were married, and I don't know where. I mean, I think I like saw this on Pinterest or something. I can't even remember where I got it from, but I told Ryan, like, we were just young, didn't know how to click, getting ill at each other. And you get in a cycle and then it just explodes. But before the explosion, I said, okay, like I'm all like teacher mode. I'm like, let's get some paper and some pencils. And I said, you write down four things that I need to work on. And I'm going to write down four things that you can work on. And I told him, I said, we're not getting mad. That's hard when you say it. And you're like, oh. So we did. And I honestly think from then till now, we're a whole lot better at saying, like, that frustrates me, or I really need this, and I mean, communication is like huge. You've got to be able to communicate about stuff. So I like that tip. Good tip.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay, so I'm going to reread one of these verses and then we're going to close it out. Luke 6:38 says, give and it will be given to you a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Okay, so we're going to close it out. I'll talk to y'all next week. Bye bye.